Folks, this video was recorded with and by Brett and Clark of the Land Canadian Adventures in Lakefield, Ontario. Unfortunately, although we had a problem with the camera and we have quite a few sections that are blur, we were not able to redo this video because of time schedule. So I just hope you forgive me. You know, my newer videos are all better and done with a better camera. But I still hope that all the major information comes across.
Hey guys, we're back. Brett behind the camera for now and me here. It's the next day. We're gonna say we ran out of light. The clock just switched and I think we underestimated a little bit how little light we got left. And then we had a great dinner. So we're gonna start and continue from here. What I have here right now is like a very, very simple setup. We have just a picnic table, a little bit of a sturdy one, and this is a more than sufficient way of actually keep going. So what we did yesterday, just to go over that, we just finished axing out the blank. So it's pretty closely worked to all my lines that we designed. Or that we drew on the paddle first, and from now on I'm just gonna switch to the draw knife. I'm gonna clamp this with some very simple one-handed clamps here to the table, and then we're gonna use a draw knife to just work it down to actually our final outlines of our final circumference. So just gonna go ahead. Clamp this here. These little clamps come in very, very handy. There's hardly a day that I don't use them. And this is pretty much fine for now. So now I'm gonna switch to my draw knife here that I keep very sharp. I'm actually still in frame. So I'm just gonna switch to my draw knife here. Like I said, I keep this very sharp, so it actually does finishing cuts as well. And I just work it down to the lines that I have. We can do little adjustments later with the craft knife. What I do usually, I'm gonna switch from the bevel up to bevel down. If I have the bevel up, it rather wants to dig into the wood, and with the bevel down, it rather gives me a little bit more forgiving cuts and wants to come out of the cut more. I love using a draw knife that way more. So with little cuts like this, keeping the draw knife on an angle, if you find it a little bit hard to take the whole surface off in one go, you can actually go at an angle and then create on the other side another angle, a little bit of a chamfer. And sometimes with this kind of table setup you just have to be a little bit creative. And then you just take this middle ridge off until you have a nice 90-degree angle. See, keep checking your lines. If there's little adjustments to make, we can still change the shape at the end a little bit with the craft knife. That's good enough for me here. Switching around the directions I need to carve in, not carving against the grain, and just gonna keep cleaning up the whole paddle shape all around, down to the line. Down here it gets a little bit tricky going the end grain, so that's something I sometimes just do after I carve completely the whole blade until it's like nice and thin, and then I can clean up the tip of the blade just using my regular carving knife. Okay guys, so here we're facing just this little situation of like along the shaft that I just started carving from this direction, obviously going from the peak down, and then here it starts to feel a little bit more teary. That means for me that I just need to switch around and carve from the other direction, reading the wood a little bit. Keep your draw knife at an angle so it's more like a slicing cut and less of a push cut, and you can just really slowly work yourself up to this area where the grain direction changes, and it leaves a very fine and nice surface. It's always helpful to aim along the shaft a little bit, and quick adjustments can be done as well, pushing the draw knife a little bit just to creep up here on your grain. Okay. Like handles and stuff. A lot of people would use planes for this, like hand planes, because it has a bottom and kind of a thing that it rides along. Tears wouldn't open up that easily. With a draw knife, if you carve against the grain, it just digs in, so it needs a little bit more care, but it's a more versatile tool, and if I have a rather minimal toolkit that is very mobile, then I rather would go all the time with an axe, a draw knife, a knife over plane and spoke shave. Okay, so just putting a little step in between here where I'm just aiming along the paddle, and what seems really perfectly symmetric might be a little bit deceiving for your eyes. So just switching to the little craft blade, the little sloyd knife here, gives me the opportunity to really even everything out. Every little thing you keep standing now, and it's not symmetric, it's gonna give you a little bit trouble later working out the handle, or like the shaft when you run around it, and there's gonna be all kind of bumps appearing. There's also a little bit of an asymmetric curve to the blade, which is fine, but I'm still gonna just quickly clean it up. Okay folks, so we're now doing actually a pretty important step, which is basically finding a center line along the paddle on the side, and then we're basically marking out the width of our blade. And you can do all kind of different gauging methods with little tools and stuff. I usually use the finger gauge, which means I'm just gonna go ahead and find my eyed middle line or center line here, and just gonna run a very crude line, my knuckle riding against the paddle. Beware of slivers. Just run it all along the paddle, and you can see this is actually a pretty okay center line. I can always come back to that. I use this method a lot. You don't have to run a chalk line or something along the paddle. It's all good like this. So that's basically it. And now I'm gonna do it on the other side, but before I do that, I just wanna give you a quick idea. There's gonna be a handle knob up here, and then since we have a wide part here, and it's all about fades when you carve paddles or any kind of implement that is gonna have to do a lot of work, it's very important to understand fades. So we have a wide part here that's fading into a narrow part, So that means the wider it is, the thinner it can be, without too much stress. Just like in a bow, your limbs would be wide and thin, the handle would be thick and narrow. So what I can do here is I can have it quite thin up here to reduce the amount of weight a little bit, and then the further I come down here where it becomes narrow, the more I have to fade it back into its original thickness. And you can do that really by eye and just make yourself some crude lines. So we come to the full thickness here, exactly where, just mark that here, exactly where we come from the wide part into the narrowest part, which is the shaft. And we're gonna do exactly the same thing here with the paddle blade. So we're starting pretty much here at most narrow part, and then we can fade from the full thickness, just very crude, into the thinnest part, which is going to be your blade. Just like that, very crude, but that's absolutely sufficient. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna readjust my gauge a little bit and just run a second line on one side, which is about a couple of millimeters, or like 3-4 millimeters off the center line, all the way to my tip. And at the tip you can even become a little bit thicker again, because after all the tip is gonna get most damage or most mechanical impact hitting rocks and stuff. And I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side, readjusting my little gauge here. And we're ending up with about 1/2 inch width throughout the paddle blade, and we're just gonna work down to these lines and even take them off, and we're gonna end up with a blade that is about 1/2 inch or even a little bit thinner than that, and that's giving me enough strength, enough backbone for heavy backcountry paddling, so you can still pull yourself a little, push yourself off rocks or something like that, and you don't have to worry about snapping. And that is, after all, the way how I make my paddles, because that's what I want to use them for, and that's my philosophy behind canoeing in general. I don't want my gear to break before I do, and that has worked pretty well for me so far.